It is time to talk about wings. Wings for the Sacramento Kings, a position that, for the last, 2 years, that's like all I've talked about for the Kings is the need for more depth on the wing, more size, athleticism, defense. And that's something that the Kings really have just failed to obtain. So I've already talked about the point guard situation for the Kings going into this season. Now it's time to talk about the wing slash forward positions. And like I said, the Kings have needed to upgrade this position or add depth to this position for a very long time. And last season at the trade deadline, they finally did something. They brought in Jake LaRavia to add depth to that wing position, and that was a breath of fresh air. Jake LaRavia was great when healthy for the Kings. Unfortunately, he did have some injury problems, but when he was healthy, he was great and was exactly what the Kings needed. And so that sounds great, but then we get to the reason that the Grizzlies traded him in the first place, which is that they declined his option. So he's not a restricted free agent. He's an unrestricted free agent. And because the Grizzlies declined that option, they were going to be limited in how much they could offer him. And that also applies to the Kings. Now that the Kings traded for him, the Kings are going to be limited in what they can offer him to retain him. And so that puts the Kings almost back at square one if they aren't able to retain Jake LaRavia, which I hope that they are. But no matter what, the Kings are going to be, or should be, looking to still add depth and possibly still add top-end talent at the wing position. And of course, the way that you go about doing that, either free agency, trade, or the draft. Most teams are not built really through free agency. Free agency is there mostly for the depth signings, and hopefully you can find a diamond in the rough. There are only going to be a few teams with cap space or a few teams with a lot of money to spend. And the Kings are one of the teams that, of course, doesn't like to go over the luxury tax. So they're not going to have a ton of money to spend on free agents, even though they do have access to the mid-level exception. And so when thinking about free agency, I think it's going to be mostly looking at the depth pieces that you're going to get for very cheap that hopefully can make an impact, but more than likely are not going to make too much of an impact on the team this coming season. And so then that leads to the other two options, which is trade. And I think the Kings should be super active in the trade market this summer. They have contracts that they should be looking to move, and they have a roster that needs balancing. And then the last is the draft. The Kings don't have a first round pick. Unfortunately, they do have a second round pick, and they have had some success at getting undrafted guys in recent drafts, although they have a new front office now, so you can't really look at that success. But hopefully that type of success continues. And so real quick, let's look at where the Kings are at right now financially and with the roster. Right now they have, 10, 11 players? 10 players that are currently under contract or have options for the next season. They have team options for Keon Ellis and Isaac Jones, and then Terrence Davis's contract is non-guaranteed. And so, as you can see, that leaves them with about $20 million to pay under the tax. So about 10% of the money under the tax left to use. And so factoring in some likely moves or possible moves, waiving Terrence Davis, if they were to bring back Jake LaRavia, bring back Trey Lyles. I have Jake LaRavia on $5.1 million because that's the maximum that the Kings can offer him. Trey Lyles, $8 million is what he made last season, so I just put that here. That leaves the Kings with $9 million left to spend, which is not a lot to spend. And that also doesn't take into account the Keon Ellis situation. The Keon Ellis situation with him having 1 year of a team option on a very cheap contract, $2.3 million, that's a steal. But then he'll hit unrestricted free agency. If they decline that option right now, he becomes a restricted free agent and they can work out a long-term deal, which is something that I think the Kings should definitely do because the Kings should not just be looking at this season. Sure, keeping Keon Ellis on that 1 year deal is great for this season and gives the Kings a lot more flexibility this season, but the Kings should be looking for the future. They should be trying to retain the two-way players like Keon Ellis. They should be extending Keegan Murray, looking towards the future. They should hopefully be retaining Jake LaRavia and trying to get him locked up long-term, maybe next offseason. Because those were the three guys at the end of last season that really showed that they're two-way players and that they are the backbone of this team. So those three guys are the most important players to me. And so if you were to decline Keon Ellis's option and give him a bigger deal, $10 million or so, that leaves you with no money to spend at all if you were to bring back Jake LaRavia and Trey Lyles. And so really, that to me is just saying that Trey Lyles may not be retained. Who knows? Maybe he will be if we can't retain Jake LaRavia. Maybe if he comes back on a much cheaper contract, he could be retained. Or if the Kings made trades to get off other salary, then he could be retained. But right now, just looking at it, the Kings really need athletic two-way players. Trey Lyles was good last season, but I think the Kings should be looking at more athletic defensive options on the wing. And so bringing him back may not be the best option. And so when you look at this path for the Kings to take, the run it back path, I think it really shows the importance of a few things. I think it shows the importance of the Kings being active in the trade market because of how restricted the Kings are with their money going into free agency. It shows the importance of keeping Jake LaRavia on a cheap contract because the Kings really need that wing depth. It shows the importance of guys like Devin Carter contributing, maybe Isaac Jones contributing on those cheap rookie contracts, maybe Isaiah Crawford, or maybe a guy that the Kings get in a second round or another undrafted guy. And then you also look at this and there's still no point guard. So the Kings still need to spend money on a point guard. So it pretty much just shows that the Kings need to make a trade to be able to truly balance out this lineup. Because you look at this rotation that the Kings have, Keon Ellis or Malik Monk being a point guard, and the run it back lineup where it's just the same 10-man that the Kings were running at the end of last season, they really would only have space for that second round player and some minimum guys. So they really do need to make some trades. And so I have 10 guys that the Kings can possibly go after. I've grouped them into 5 different categories, 2 guys for each category. The first category is the cheap free agents. The second is the next tier of free agents that are going to cost a little bit more and that the Kings can really only go after if they don't bring back LaRavia and Lyles or if they make some sort of trade. And then we have 3 categories for trades: the cheap trades, the medium trades, and the big swings of trades. And so starting off with the very cheap free agents, I have Jae'Sean Tate. You look at his numbers from last season, obviously 52 games, 3.5 points per game. The numbers don't blow you away at all. And that's exactly why he's a cheap free agent. He's a guy who you can hopefully get on a minimum deal, and he's going to give you that strength and defense on the wing. Not a great offensive player. He's also 6'4", but he plays bigger than 6'4". He was lost to be behind a lot of really good wings on the Houston Rockets. And I think this is the type of depth piece that the Kings have been lacking the last couple of seasons. I'm not saying that I think Jae'Sean Tate is going to come in and make a massive difference, but I think he is a guy who could come in and play at times. He has NBA experience, and so I think he's worth taking a shot on. The next cheap free agent I have, oh, look at this. Yeah, it's Jake LaRavia. Obviously, I already talked about Jake LaRavia, but I just cannot stress how good he was for the Kings at the end of last season when he was healthy. Shot 42% from 3 last season, 37% on his career. He showed some ability to actually create off the dribble. At times it was chaotic. At other times he was like crossing guys up and getting to the rim. And he showed the energy and intensity defensively. He's got size, he's got length. He's just the perfect player that I think the Kings need. And so it's super important that they retain him. And he did an interview recently. It sounded like he's happy that the Kings retained Doug Christie. He has a good relationship with Doug Christie. Definitely is considering coming back, but also mentioned other teams that could possibly be looking for his services. So right now I'm pretty 50-50 on whether he's going to come back. For some reason, I have a good feeling about him coming back. That's probably some leftover feelings from the Malik Monk situation when it, I was pretty 50-50 on whether Monk was coming back, and it ended up that he did come back. And I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that he could come back and slot into the starting lineup. And I say that because the Kings need a point guard. So if they bring in a point guard, then you have whoever that point guard is, you have Zach LaVine, you have Keegan Murray, and you have Domantas Sabonis. So then who's the 5th starter? It's not going to be Malik Monk. If you slot Keon Ellis in there, all of a sudden you're very small, and if you put DeMar DeRozan in there, then, I mean, you're just right back where you were at the end of last season. And so I think it could be interesting if the Kings go to Jake LaRavia and say, hey, you could get a starting spot next season. That might entice him to come back and re-sign. The next category of players is the more expensive free agents, and these are guys that are very unlikely for the Kings to go after because they just don't have the money to be able to go after them. But again, anything can happen, trades can happen, the books can change, and so if things do, then they could go after a guy like Santi Aldama, who showed that he could be a starting level player for the Grizzlies last season. You can see he's 6'11", so he's got that size defensively. He's not the greatest defender of all time, but he does have the size. Averaged 12.5 points per game last season, can shoot the three ball, stretch the floor. And so I just think it would be really nice to have a guy that is almost 7 feet tall. In some places I have seen him listed at 7 feet tall, who can play alongside Sabonis, can stretch the floor on offense, isn't going to clog things up there. And he's still a young player, so you'd be investing in his growth. And then the other more expensive free agent is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Recently played really well in the playoffs for the Timberwolves. Doesn't have the same size as a Santi Aldama or a Jake LaRavia, but he does have the size and length to be able to play the three. Shot 38% from three-point range last season, is a solid defender. Showed the ability to score off the dribble. And the Timberwolves, I don't know if they're going to be able to retain Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Naz Reid. And so he could be a guy that is available. He's going to be 27 going into next season. And so he's just a guy I really like, but again, unlikely that the Kings would be able to get him. Now we move on to the trade targets. And we have Matisse Thybulle, a very interesting player because when he is healthy, when he is on the court, he is one of the best wing defenders in the league. I mean, just look at the nicknames that they have for him here. Mathief, the Disruptor, Spider-Man. I don't know who calls him Spider-Man. But he's a two-time all-defense selection. Not a very big sample size. Did shoot almost 44% from three last season. But again, only played those 15 games. The injury risk with him is huge. But he's probably not going to be a guy who's super expensive to trade for. And he's going to be on an expiring contract next season for $11 million. It is a player option, so he could decline that. Another trade target is another guy who just plays defense. Jonathan Isaac, even more so than Matisse Thybulle, is only out there for his defense. Shot 25, almost 26% from three last season. Killed the Kings from three last season for some reason, but overall, not a good shooter, not a good offensive player. But if you're just talking about just pure defense, at 6'10", with his length, with his defensive ability, he's one of the best defensive players in the entire league. He played 71 games last season, which for him is very good because he has had those injury problems. He's going to be making $15 million next season, has a 4-year extension. But the Magic are a team that could be looking for some offense, some shooting, which the Kings have. And the Kings are looking for the size and defense, which the Magic have to give up. And so, yes, the offensive concerns, the fit concerns, the injury concerns are there. But man, if you just want a guy that's going to go out there and play defense, this is your guy. Now taking a step up in price, you have Andrew Wiggins. He's making $28 million next season. I believe it's $30 million player option the season after that. Obviously, he would require a fair cost to trade for. The Heat are not necessarily, I don't think they're looking to sell, although maybe they should be. They're probably not looking to trade him. But if they do decide to sell, if they do decide that the Andrew Wiggins experiment is short-lived in Miami, then that's absolutely a guy that the Kings should go after. This is the type of two-way player that I feel like the Kings have been missing alongside Keegan in the starting lineup as another wing. Would add offensive punch, adds that athleticism defensively, and just feels like a perfect fit. And the real problem would be the cost in obtaining him. And then we have Jonathan Kuminga. So I guess we're just going after Warrior or former Warrior wings. But Jonathan Kuminga, he's a restricted free agent. My gut tells me that the Warriors are going to retain Jonathan Kuminga. But if they decide not to, he is a guy who has star potential. Will he ever reach that potential? I'm not so sure. But he showed when he's given the ball, when Steph Curry was out in the playoffs, he had some very big games. Now he's also prone to having quiet games. He's super athletic, but the defense is still a concern. Obviously can't shoot the three. The paint would be clogged. but he would just be a young guy that you're really investing in and hoping that he grows in the future. Then moving up another tier in terms of cost to obtain, I actually initially had Zion, but then this morning, as of recording, some reports about Zion being sued came out. So I'm going to leave that alone and say that the Kings should stay away from Zion. And so instead we have RJ Barrett. Really, RJ Barrett was a guy who came to mind just because of a report I saw that the Kings were interested. Now the validity of that report, very questionable, very, very questionable. It was like the Spurs, the Hawks, the Bulls, and the Kings were interested, I think, which is hilarious. The group of teams, along with the Raptors, like the Kings have made deals with all of those teams. We need to get out of that circle of teams. But with the Raptors bringing in Brandon Ingram, they really just have like a hodgepodge group of guys. Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Brandon Ingram, Jakob Poeltl. It's very interesting. I have no idea how it's going to go next season for them. It could go really well and they're in the playoffs and playing well. It also could be a disaster. I'm not really sure how the fit's going to be. But if they, have looked at RJ Barrett and say, we don't want to pay this guy 26, 28, 30 million, and they bring in Brandon Ingram and say, this is going to be our guy, then it should be a guy that the Kings look at because he's still only 24 years old. He's almost 25. His birthday is, like 2 weeks. So 25 years old, averaging 20 plus points per game. Very good athlete on the wing. And the reason that I like this is because of his age and the way that the Kings would be getting younger and adding a young guy to build around. Now, saying that, they could go the complete opposite direction and just say, let's be as old as possible. Let's get a 36, 37-year-old. But hey, it's Kevin Durant. Why not? If you just want to think about next season, then sure, go after Kevin Durant. I mean, at the start of this video, I talked about how the Kings shouldn't just be looking at this season and they should be looking at, getting Keon Ellis on a long-term deal and trying to lock up Jake LaRavia and Keegan Murray. But if you want to throw that out the window, then sure, go after Kevin Durant. It would be very fun next season. But obviously, that's not a very long-term plan. And there are a ton more names outside of that. Some free agents, cheap free agents, Taurean Prince, Amir Coffey, Chris Boucher, Lamar Stevens, Bruce Brown, Gary Payton II. Some other trade targets like Haywood Highsmith, Isaac Okoro, Ochai Agbaji, Cam Johnson, John Collins, Kyle Anderson. The Kings need to come away from this offseason with at least two of these guys. Really, they need one guy that can slot into the starting lineup, and then they need another solid bench piece. And so I think the very first priority has to be Jake LaRavia. But I want to show this real quick because I think it's a good example of the type of move that the Kings can make. I have the Kings here keeping Jake LaRavia, moving off of DeMar DeRozan and bringing in Jonathan Isaac and Matisse Thybulle. Now, Jonathan Isaac and Matisse Thybulle, I'm not saying bring in both of these players. I'm just saying from a contract point of view, DeMar DeRozan's $24 million goes out. And then 25, 26 million comes in wing depth. And that's the type of move that the Kings need to make. I mean, they also need to consider the point guard position as well, of course. And so maybe replace one of these guys with a point guard. But from a money perspective, they really need to move off that DeMar DeRozan money, in my opinion, to bring in that wing depth and to bring in a point guard. One possible scenario that I came up with was a scenario where the Kings bring in Tyus Jones at $8 million. They get Keon Ellis on a $10 million contract. They bring back Jake LaRavia, and they trade DeMar DeRozan for Duncan Robinson and Haywood Highsmith. It's an expiring contract for Duncan Robinson, and you're bringing in a guy in Haywood Highsmith who's on a solid deal, who again can be wing depth, solid defensive player. And so that's the type of move that I really hope that the Kings make. And then alongside that, you have Malik Monk, who can also possibly be moved, but the Kings just need to move some of their guard money, which takes up, as you can see, let's go up here. Right now, it's taking up, 40% of what they have to spend in their guards, and then 20% towards wings. And that's with DeMar DeRozan being classified as a wing. With what the Kings have right now on the books, just look at how little money is being spent towards two-way players, towards defensive players. Keegan at $11 million, Keon at $2.3 million, maybe Jake LaRavia at $5.1 million, Devin Carter on his rookie deal. It's it's not enough devoted to those type of players and not enough devoted to winged defenders. So I am just hoping and praying that the Kings are able to retain Jake LaRavia, because I think if they can do that, it makes everything so much easier. Retaining him on a cheap contract, that means the Kings have to do a lot less searching for more wing depth. They would still need a little bit more past Jake LaRavia, but that's a very good start. And I just hope that the Kings are very active in the trade market, looking for guys that can either play alongside Keegan Murray or behind him. So that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. I've gone through point guards. I've gone through the wings. I guess that leaves the big men last. Not that the Kings really need to be looking for centers necessarily. They have Sabonis, they have Valanciunas, but neither of those guys are shot blocking guys. You have Isaac Jones, but he's a little undersized. So I might next week make a video on possible big men that the Kings could bring in, especially guys that can play alongside Sabonis, which would be the dream, of course, but feels unlikely because there just aren't that many guys who can do that. But that might be what I'm coming with next week. We'll see. But no matter what it is, I will see you guys next week. Peace.